Welcome to Uncovered. It's Wednesday. I'm Anthony. He's Ron. We're about to uncover the MAGA propaganda that isn't covered by the mainstream and corporate media. Ron, it's every week I get to this moment in the show where I'm like, could it get any worse? Do we want to keep waking up to news that is increasingly terrifying for not just the Americans, but everybody around the world? Before we move to Iran and the war and the latest with NATO, because there's a huge story, let's start domestically, because Trump has actually taken himself to the Supreme Court, which is kind of unprecedented, isn't it? Is that to put pressure on the judges?
Yep. We know he's talked about this before, that one of his heroes is Bobby Knight, the old Indiana college basketball coach. And he talked about how he learned from Knight how to work the refs, is how he referred to it. And he says to that, He said during his criminal trials that he basically uses that strategy with judges where, what Knight told him was, if you yell at the judges and give you a hard time, they might not give you that decision that you're yelling at them about, but they might give you the next one because they don't want to get yelled at again. And so Trump has been employing that strategy with the Supreme Court. We saw it with tariffs and some of the other decisions. Really hasn't worked very well for him. I don't think it's going to work in this particular situation, but we have never had a president, 235-year history of the Supreme Court. That is the first time in the history of the United States that any sitting president has attended an oral argument. So what is it that he considered so important that he needed to be there in person to stare down the justices? The birthright citizenship argument. So obviously, you can see here, sometimes we go, this kind of stuff is all Stephen Miller. It's really not. I mean, Stephen Miller is sort of the driving policy force behind it, but never forget, Trump is 100% in favor of all of this stuff.
Yes.
And so he felt, even more important than the tariffs. This was the decision that he decided to break 235 years of precedent over. The thing I was thinking about is this. We've talked about this before. Trump has zero respect for separation of powers, divided government, the Constitution. He views those things as obstacles to overcome. In other words, he doesn't respect those things, revere those things. He doesn't look at an independent Supreme Court as a positive thing, as a good thing, the way most of us do. He views that as a problem for him to overcome. And so how does he do it? He does it with threats. He does it by, posting things on True Social, and now getting actually in front of them and face to face. Now, I don't think it will have any impact on them whatsoever, especially in this case, but it does show you his mentality.
We're hearing that the Supreme Court appears skeptical of this move to end birthright citizenship. This is kind of the latest that's kind of coming out of the court as the oral argument evolves. Just explain to people, because this is massive, isn't it?
Yeah.
If you're born in the US, and this doesn't just happen in America. Trump was always like, birthright citizenship only happens in the US, and that's completely untrue. It happens all over the world. I think it's maybe 14 countries that have it, maybe more. I may be confusing that statistic with something completely different. But if you're born in the country, you're automatically a citizen and you get citizenship. And because Trump is a eugenicist, along with quite a few of the people that are in his cabinet now, they have this kind of white supremacist view of the world, and that really, it's the pure kind of Caucasian blood that he is keen to kind of maintain, and he thinks that birthright citizenship is a way to achieve that. But what are the chances of this? Because they can't retroactively change this law. If you were born in the US, you're born in the US. This would surely have to be for the future, beyond 2028, I guess.
They'd have to interpret the words of the 14th Amendment in a way that just doesn't reflect the plain text. So, I mean, I understand some of the arguments that they're making against birthright citizenship. The problem is we're not in Congress here debating a new statute. You know, we're not on the floor arguing whether somebody who flies, a pregnant person who flies in on a tourist visa and gives birth from China and then gives birth and then flies back, raises their child for the next 25 years in China, and that person can run for president of the United States. Like, I understand those crazy examples that they will throw out there as far as like, this is a flawed system, but I certainly don't view it as widespread as they claim that this problem is. But the main thing that Trump keeps saying over and over again, which I think is probably the most ridiculous argument, is that the 14th Amendment was really only intended to apply to freed slaves. And certainly at the time that it was passed, that was the main problem that they were addressing, was that the slaves in the South who had just been liberated had never been considered U.S. citizens under the law, under the Constitution. And the 14th Amendment was designed to confer that on all of them in case there was any doubt. But if they wanted to limit it to slaves, they could have. Congress very well could have. They could have said this only applies to freed slaves, but they did not. They made it very broad, and they just said anyone, any person born on U.S. soil is a U.S. citizen. And so it's pretty hard to get around that from a constitutional legal standpoint.
It just depends on how far these MAGA judges are embedded into this Heritage Foundation Project 2025 movement, because this was baked into that. And if you read that document, you know, going back a couple of years now, you'll know that this has always been on their radar. And so we know that Clarence Thomas is kind of into it. I mean, Roberts to a certain extent too. So is there a chance that there is a kind of ulterior motive here, that it's not just about the Constitution interpretation, it's actually about changing America from the top down?
Yeah, because you think about it, you know, Stephen Miller and others on the right have said that we really need to deport about 100 million people. And these are the people that they're talking about, because that's about if you think, well, where are they coming up with that number? That's about the number of birthright citizens we have in the United States. Yeah. So that's what they're saying. There's close to 100 million Americans who are Americans that way. Fred Trump became an American through birthright citizenship. His parents were not citizens of the United States when he was born in the United States. And that's their argument. Their legal argument basically is not what Trump is saying about the slaves. Their legal argument is, if the parents or the mother was not here lawfully or legally, in other words, is here just on a tourist visa, or it's not a U.S. citizen, and they were here on a temporary status, on an asylum claim or waiting for an asylum claim to be adjudicated, then that doesn't count. That basically that nullifies giving birth on U.S. soil. And again, I understand some of the arguments, and I have no doubt that there are people who specifically come to the United States to give birth so that their children will be U.S. citizens. But hey, that the law is the law. I mean, if you have a problem with that, with the 14th Amendment being worded that way, you have to change it. The problem is, you know, that would be virtually impossible.
We're discovering, though, that the law is kind of irrelevant to Donald Trump and to the way that he operates. And so, you know, I do feel, just playing devil's advocate, that I do feel that there's a lot of commentary where it's like, well, yeah, but that's the law. And we're talking about a lawless president. We're talking about a lifelong criminal. We're talking about somebody who is the antithesis of following the law. And so Trump does have a habit of finding loopholes in language. He has a habit of also just the rhetoric. You know, it's like, even though it might not be statute, he will run the country like that as long as he is in power.
Look, we saw that in the tariffs case, you know, like literally 5 minutes after the Supreme Court overruled him on tariffs, he was claiming that he just read the decision and found a way around it,
Right.
And by the way, they haven't refunded a single dollar yet. They're still fighting tooth and nail in court about giving the money back. So sure, I mean, the issue isn't necessarily what the Supreme Court rules. It's what does Trump do after they rule against him? Does he accept the ruling and move on, or does he look for another way around it? But I think this one is a little different than the tariff situation, where this one should be pretty cut and dry. At least the good part about this is there has been this debate among, especially right-wing intellectual circles, Heritage Club type people, about the scope of the Fourth Amendment and how far it goes and whether it's absolute. 14th Amendment. But I guess the one good part about Trump challenging all of these things is once you have a ruling on this, as we did with tariffs, then that's it. The debate has now ended, at least in the legal circles, and there's no question anymore about what the scope is once the Supreme Court rules.
Yeah. Okay, let's stick with the Supreme Court, because there is this mail-in voting executive order that Trump has written. I mean, and this kind of goes back to what I was just saying, that he is the executive order president, right? He seems to think that his signature overrules and overwrites not just Constitution, but the Supreme Court and the Congress in the moment that he is kind of communicating. It's almost like, because I was actually writing a Substack about this last night. It's like the timeline of Donald Trump is whatever he says in that moment is true as far as he believes it. The fact that it might be illegal, the fact that it might be a falsehood, the fact that there might be some time shifting involved means that when he's saying it, the narcissist in chief believes it and rules in that way. But things change and his opinions change and everything changed on a dime, and they don't even seem to care about the video evidence of him saying something completely different 2 days earlier.
Well, that's
right. So we're living in his world, aren't we?
Yeah, that's the thing. He always tells you ahead of time what he's going to do. It's just the problem is he floods the zone with so much stuff that people tend to move on and forget about it. Like, we'll get to some of these things, but like leaving NATO, I mean, this is something that he has talked about for a long time and hinted towards that he's going to do. And if you pay close attention to what he has to say, you won't be surprised when he actually does. I'm always mystified at how like the media or politician people in Congress are like, oh my God, he's pulling us out of NATO. I'm like, let me show you my tweets from 5 years ago where I said Trump is going to pull us out of NATO in his second term. I mean, he says these things. So on this mail-in ballot situation, he literally said like 3 months ago, if Congress doesn't pass the SAVE Act, I'll do it by executive order. He said that, and everybody's like, oh, you can't do that. He's not going to do that. That's illegal. And it's like, here we are.
But it's the word of the president, isn't it? He is taking advantage of the sanctity of the word of the president, which used to mean something. And now under his rule, it operates differently. It's like if he says it, then it becomes law, even though legal people know that's not true. Yes,
that's what he believes. I mean, he believes that that's the way that the U.S. government should function, is that the president is sort of all powerful and he can do things by executive order. And there's always ways around, just because the law says something, just because Congress passed a law that says that a president can't pull out of NATO without congressional approval. Well, the way he looks at it, that's just like, we'll work around that. We'll get around that. And it's the same thing with these mail-in ballots. So he couldn't get the SAVE Act through. So again, you have to, with these kind of things, the devil's in the details. And when you look at how this executive order is supposed to work, and by the way, of course, every state with mail-in ballots is going to challenge this. They already are, including Republican states like Utah, which does almost exclusively mail-in ballot. I can see many Republican states that do mail-in ballots challenging this, because who is the enforcer of this executive order? It's the United States Postal Service. That's the sinister thing about this. And it shows you how diabolical and evil Stephen Miller and these other people are that think about how to implement these policies. So they want to ban mail-in ballots. Well, how do you do that? Well, they can't issue any kind of order saying no state can have mail-in ballots. So what they say is they put on the post office because they have control of the post office. So they can say, okay, states, you can't mail. You're not allowed to mail people ballots unless you first submit to the federal government a complete list of all of your registered voters. And then the U.S. Postal Service and the federal government, when you have your list of ballots that you want to mail, we will check those against the list that you previously submitted. And if you're trying to mail a ballot to someone who we haven't already approved, we're not going to let the Postal Service deliver that ballot. So they're actually going to use the Postal Service to block ballots. That's the absolute sinister thing about this. So the states can say, well, screw you, we're not doing that. But what happens if he has the post office hold all the ballots at crunch time? So obviously this is something that has to be challenged. It has to be challenged right away, and it is being challenged.
We're only 7 months away from the midterms, and it's the first of the month today. The time is rolling on fast. Are they purposely doing it now because they want it to still be kind of up in the air when we get
I don't think so.
Closer to November?
I think he really thought that he was going to get John Thune to bust the filibuster or to pull some kind of shenanigans, because he had people like Mike Lee and others in Congress advising him that there were ways around the filibuster on this. And he tried to attach it to the DHS funding bill. He tried to attach it to other things and force it through. And I think it only when he finally gave up and said it's not going to get through Congress, that is when he issued this virtually right away.
We have this posting, this kind of scoop from the Daily Caller. Trump will sign an executive order at 5 p.m. This was posted last night, cracking down on mail-in voting across the country. The executive order will require the administration to create a list of confirmed U.S. citizens who are eligible to vote in each state. It will also mandate that absentee ballots only to be sent to those on each state's approved mail-in ballot list. Ballots will now have specific, secure envelopes with unique barcodes for tracking. States who disobey the order may lose federal funds under the presidential action. I just thought of something, Ron, and because there's been a gap in my reporting, and I've said out loud that it's ambiguous as to whether or not this change is going to be beneficial for Republicans or actually be a negative, right? And so that's been the gap in the reporting, that nobody really knows because it's never been tested before. But it just occurred to me as I was reading that they are clearly, because they don't know either whether or not it's going to go one way or the other.
They think
therefore they think they will, right? Therefore they have to have some other mechanism. Like this is like a cover story. This canceling mail-in voting is a cover story for some kind of rigging that they're doing elsewhere, because I don't see that this is enough. I don't see that this is foolproof enough. And they have to win, like considering everything that's at stake and all the fraud and all of the law breaking, they have to win, right? They have to win their midterms, and they have to keep winning as far as they're concerned. So to me, this suggests that there is something else that we haven't found yet that enables them to manipulate votes by nature of these new rules.
Well, they tipped their hand, seems to me, in Minnesota when, they sent all of ICE in and they had all this mayhem. And Pam Bondi said to the Attorney General of Minnesota, we'll pull ICE out if you turn over your voter rolls to us. And
correct.
This new executive order would require states who use mail-in ballots to turn over their voter rolls to the federal government. So that to me is the main goal. They've tried a million different ways to force states to turn over voter rolls. The federal government has no voter rolls. Voting in this country for 235 years is controlled by state and local officials. The federal government plays no role in it whatsoever. So they are trying to set the precedent any way they can to force state and local governments to turn over their voter rolls. The question that you raise is, what are they then going to do with those?
Yeah.
I'm sure they have some kind of plan cooked up to cause chaos, to tamper with the elections. I'm not exactly sure what it is. We could sit here and speculate, but this is not about, preventing non-US citizens from voting. That is the smokescreen. It has nothing to do with that, because that is just not happening. And it is just all about, like you said, they could implement all of that. They could implement the SAVE Act. They could implement this, and it could like gerrymandering, it could completely backfire in Republicans' faces. Because I can foresee this causing more problems for rural, small town Republican
voters. But they're not that stupid, Ron. They're not that stupid. They're very good at corruption. They're very good at fraud.
They know that foreign people voting is not an issue. And they are using that as the excuse for some other motive to get their hands on this stuff.
That's what we need to get to. Unfortunately, it might be time that we need to just wait to see. But at the moment, like I say, there's a gap, as I see it, in this timeline. And I think you're right. It's probably more about purging of voter rolls and of names, because they found loopholes for that too.
Or not delivering ballots, or
not delivering ballots.
To deliver ballots in democratic areas. And we have already seen with everything else, with disaster relief, with federal funds, they specifically target, with ICE raids, they specifically target democratic areas. And it'll be the same thing here. The people that they're going to harass and cancel ballots and refuse to deliver mail, it's not going to be, in rural Texas. It's going to be in Philadelphia.
Let's take a look at Trump on this.
Okay, so that's a big deal. Very proud of it. And I don't know how it can be challenged. You'll probably challenge it. You may find a rogue judge. You get a lot of rogue judges, very bad people, very bad judges. But that's the only way that can be changed, and hopefully we'll win an appeal if it is, but I don't see how anybody can challenge it. I don't see how they can challenge it. And remember, it's about voter integrity. We want to have honest voting in our country, because if you don't have honest voting, you can't have really a nation, if you want to know the truth. Howard, I'll give that to you.
It's very clever, powerful projection to say we're only doing this to protect the vote, because a lot of people will believe that. And you do have to understand the history and the subplot to recognize that this is a scam.
Well, and then what he's doing right there is what he just did with the Supreme Court. He's intimidating the judges. He's saying, I can't imagine how any rogue judge, any judge who would rule against us is a rogue judge. He's a criminal. He's not a patriot, or he or she, that's what he's saying. He's like warning judges. But I don't see how any judge can rule against me on this. It goes back to the old Bobby Knight thing, of him working the refs to get calls on the basketball court. That's what he's doing right there. You just saw it. It in living color. Trump working the refs. He's warning judges, don't you dare strike this. Now, this is one of the most blatantly obvious unconstitutional things ever. What does Trump know about the 14th Amendment, the 15th Amendment, voting laws in various states, constitutional law when it comes? He knows nothing. And yet he's sitting there saying, I don't see how any judge could possibly find this to be illegal. Well, many judges around the country are going to find this to be illegal. The thing is, by waiting this long, though, I can't imagine this being resolved before midterm ballots go out. It's not just, you can't just focus on the date of the election. It's when ballots are mailed. And
but that's the ambiguity they're looking for, right? They purposely want this to disrupt the process of the election. They want this, they want it to be ambiguous. They want people to think, oh, can I vote by mail? Or well, I just won't bother. This is all part of the plan. And at the same time, if we just zoom out a bit.
This isn't the end of the plan. There's more coming.
Oh, sure. But it's degrading America's democracy on the world stage. And this, we need to remember that the world is watching every single move. And when he says I'm ending mail-in ballots, dozens of countries around the world do mail-in ballots. It's absolutely standard. It's nothing to do with COVID. It's quite normal. It's actually one of the safest forms of voting. But to have the president saying there's fraud and I'm going to end it, again, it's another nail in the coffin of American democracy. And
undermining
the international community are very sad about that.
Undermining trust in the democratic process and the outcome is what Trump is all about. And you go back 5 years ago, and all the polls showed that it was like 90% of Americans, both parties had confidence in the reliability of our elections. They didn't have very little doubt. Sure, there were isolated incidents of fraud, but most people are not going to risk going to prison to vote for someone. That's a heavy price for somebody. And that's why the reason why election fraud almost never happens is exactly that. See, if you rob a bank, at least there's a chance you might get away with some money. Or if you commit some other crime, there's a chance you could personally benefit, like sell drugs. But in this case, you're going to risk going to prison so you can vote for Joe Biden. I'm not risking prison for that. So, I mean, that's why it doesn't happen. And illegal people, I mean, undocumented people, that you think they're going to risk being detained by ICE and deported so they can vote for somebody? Give me a break. That's the last thing on their mind when they're trying to get citizenship or have their asylum claim granted, is to put it in jeopardy so they can vote for some person for Congress or president. It's utterly preposterous to even consider that is happening. But what Trump has done now, you look at those old polls that used to 5 years ago showed 90% of the country believed in had confidence in our democratic process. Now it's like 30%. Even you have a lot of Democrats, because of the stuff that Trump is doing, who say they've lost confidence in the system. And that's exactly what Trump wants.
This is becoming, if it hasn't already, a unitary government. Stephen Miller accidentally said that word out on CNN one time, do you remember, and had to stop himself and then pretended that the line had gone down and it's weird freeze. But that is everything that they care about. And a unitary government can be defined in many ways. I like to call it a dictatorship because that's really what they're planning for. Now, I was going to show this clip of the presidential library a little bit later, but I actually want to kind of whiz it up to this point in our schedule, because Eric Trump is behind this, and he posted a video, which I'll show in just a second. And he said, over the past 6 months, I've poured my heart and soul into this project with my incredible team at Trump organization. So here's the thing. The mindset of Donald Trump, Eric Trump, Donald Trump Jr., Ivanka, the whole family, is that running America as if it is the Trump organization is kind of how they see it. And when you watch this video that they've poured their heart and soul into, it exposes the level of dictatorship that they have in mind. That's the level of branding, the way that Trump is on everything. Now we're talking about banknotes and coins. He sees himself as a monarch, and even after his death, through, I don't know, old age or a kind of Elvis-style cheeseburger, he wants to leave a visual mark on America. So just take a look at this video, and then we'll gather ourselves afterwards. So now I think might start to recognize where this is headed, because I can't tell the difference between that, Ron, and watching, say, a Marvel movie whereby the baddie's headquarters is always some kind of corporate building with baddie written across the top, in this case, Trump. I mean, I don't know. I'm kind of lost for words.
You see his office there in the Trump library is an exact replica of the Oval Office. That would be his office. So does that look like a library to you? So here's what we know. We know that for the last year, Trump has been taking in a lot of money and a lot of stuff that under the umbrella of a presidential library. Some of the settlements that he reached with media companies, the money that they pledged was supposed to go to his library foundation. The Qatari jet, which he has received at the end of his presidency, is supposed to become property of the presidential library. We know that the section of land that you just saw right there on the Miami coast, which is worth over $60 million, was given to him. Can't give it to him personally, given to the Trump Presidential Library by Ron DeSantis, and the government of the state of Florida took that land away from a college and gave it to the Trump Presidential Library, a $60 million parcel of land.
Wow.
And we all joked for the last year, it's like, there's never going to be a presidential library. Like, that's ridiculous. Trump doesn't even read books. Like, he's not interested in anything like that.
Yeah.
And now we see what it looks like, and we realize, well, it's really not a library at all, is it?
No.
I mean, and when he was
books are optional.
He was asked about it yesterday after this video came out, and he says, is this really going to be a library? And what Trump said is, well, it might be condos, it might be offices, and it might be what was the other word he used? Condos, offices, or he used some other word. But the bottom line is, it wasn't library related. What I think he's going to do is this, and what it looks like to me is like the bottom couple of floors. And by the way, there's the Qatari jet was in there. Is going to be like this mausoleum museum to Trump, and then his offices will be like up on the top. And he's going to sell the rest of it. He's going to sell like multi-million-dollar office space or condos. And he's going to be actually the first president in the U.S. history to make a massive profit, assuming he's still alive, off selling parts of his quote-unquote library.
Yeah. Now, this kind of has a connection to the ballroom in many ways, and there's been some big news on the ballroom this week. Of course, the ballroom that's replaced the East Wing, which Trump bulldozed without permission. So the two big stories really are, one, that the courts now have effectively put this project on hold. And number two, Trump let slip that there's a giant military installation being built underneath the ballroom. So let's just take a look at Trump on Air Force One, where he was first asked about the Iran war, and they were talking about casualties and like serious things. And then he just completely changed the subject and started showing off his new design.
And that porch will be magnificent, looking in between the columns. They no longer, we took the stairs out that were on the south side and really replaced them with these stairs. So you have an open porch and you have the closed porch under the columns, overlooking the Washington Monument, the Jefferson Memorial, and the Lincoln Memorial / Monument. So that's great. This is a view of the columns as they are going to be made. They're going to be hand carved and they're beautiful. Top of the line, there'll be Corinthian, which is considered the best, most beautiful by far. Okay?
What's your timeline on this thing?
Timeline, so we're ahead of schedule and under budget. And all of this money, all of the money paid are paid by myself and donors, and it's all donors. There's not one dime of government money going into the ballroom. Now the military is built.
Okay, goes on, but I'll stop it there because A, his face, B, his lies. why is there, just on a tangent for a second, why is there not more uproar about the fact that it is being paid for by private donors? Because this excuse that he always gives, oh, well, the taxpayers aren't paying for it, and that kind of is a bit of an excuse to have people not scrutinize this project and to kind of leave him alone. But actually, it's far more corrupt than anything else he's doing.
Well, because the reason why it's no taxpayer money is because there's no possible way that Congress would ever pass or appropriate the money to fund this project. So it's not like, it sort of reminds me of like when Matt Gaetz used to brag about not taking PAC money. It's like no PACs wanted to give money to Matt Gaetz. So it's easy to say that.
But these donors will have ownership over the White House.
Well, the thing is, we've already seen how he moves money around inside the government. We're not really going to know the full extent of that until Democrats take control of some of these committees and have oversight. But look at with the TSA agents. He suddenly found the money to pay TSA agents, right? And he's done this with the last shutdown. He moved money around to pay the military, right? So we know that he has. It wouldn't shock me, because he claims that it's not fully financed. He has pledges. He has pledges from people. They could change their mind. It's not like this money is sitting in the bank. It's the same thing with these foreign governments who have promised to make investments in the United States. They're promises. So
22 trillion.
He has pledges from all these corporate CEOs and stuff to donate money. He doesn't actually have the money in the bank, and they could take back those pledges at any point in time. So the reason why, well, first of all, let me just say this. Anybody who watches Trump on a daily basis, as unfortunately I do, and listen to everything that he says, will know that he is more obsessed with the ballroom than any other subject on earth, more than deportations, more than the wars, more than the Peace Prize, more than Greenland. He talks about the ballroom more than any other single subject during his presidency. He is obsessed with this thing. And we always ask, like, why? Why is he so upset? Is it because he just really loves being a host and wants to throw these big parties in DC like he does at Mar-a-Lago? But then we find out another thing that you said, which is they're building this massive, as part of this complex, this massive military doomsday style bunker. And by the way, this is how I see him using tax dollars to pay for it. Because my question is, are they going to take money out of the military budget to justify putting all that in, since he's claiming now that's also there? And then the question is, how much of that money coming out of the military budget is going to end up paying for the above ground stuff? So I don't believe his story about the CEOs are paying for all this. I don't believe that for a second. So then I put out a poll. I said to everyone on social media, I said, who thinks that his obsession with this ballroom is more about what's happening above ground or more about what's happening underground? And it was like 80% of the polls. Now I know my people are biased, but 80% of respondents says the bunker is what he really wants, even more than the ballroom. And you have to ask why.
Well, our speculation on this has been that this is a fortress that he's trying to get finished before the end of his term, so that he can live there, rule from there. It'll be, he was talking in the rest of that video, it's going to be bomb-proof, it's going to be drone-proof. That's right. He kept going on about the drones, that they wouldn't be able to get in. And to me, that was him kind of saying the quiet parts out loud yet again, where he's like, this is where I am going to be holed up in exile, but effectively running a kind of rogue government from this extended White House, because he's not going to throw any balls there. I mean, it's ridiculous, calling it a ballroom. This is a giant military installation so that he can rule for eternity, or certainly the Trump family can. And that's why I said it's kind of connected to the presidential library video, because, the branding is Trump. It's all Trump, 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 just like Trump Tower and like Trump Resorts. The only successes he's really had is where he licenses his name to properties that are operated by other entities, where he's not actually, it's not actually him. So if you go to, especially in the Middle East and in the Far East too, you get a sense of the fact that these places are quite well run. It's because Trump's nothing to do with them. He just licensed his name and takes the money for it. And so that's how I see this kind of this dystopian future playing out.
And you know, honestly,
go ahead.
in the same way, this connects with the Kid Rock helicopter flyby. This all ties in because this is sort of what I do in my daily bulletins on Substack. Is I take all of these different pieces of the puzzle that are happening in Trump world, and I try and line them up and put them together and show people, okay, these individual things seem insignificant in isolation, but if you put this together with this and this and this, and then you read those 4 or 5 things in a row, your eyes go, whoa, I see the picture now. So the politicization of the military by Hegseth, by Vance, by Trump, giving these partisan political speeches, trashing Democrats, is all part of this. Because, and what I said in a tweet this morning, I said, to me, I continue to harp on this, even though nobody else seems to care very much, which is the injecting partisan politics into the military and getting military to act out, members of the military to act out in a partisan political way, which has never happened before because it's always been strictly discouraged, is all part of a plan. And where that's going to become most dangerous is not now. It's in the last year of his term. That's when he is going to want the military to do some pretty egregious things, I believe.
Right, to pick a side. Yeah.
Exactly. And so when you have helicopter pilots on a Saturday buzz No Kings protesters, 2 Apache helicopters buzzing a No Kings protest in Nashville, then you have them fly to the mountaintop residence of Kid Rock, who just performed at the MAGA halftime show, who performed at the Republican National Convention, and who has appeared in the Oval Office with Donald Trump multiple times this term, and they go do a flyby of him, and that gets posted on social media, and the U.S. Army suspends those pilots and opens an investigation, as they should. These pilots should either be thrown out of the Army or busted in rank or lose their wings and be put in charge of logistics or some other job, supply, not flying. And so the Army opens up an investigation to maybe do some of those things. And Pete Hegseth, in a social media post, overrules the U.S. Army and says, no, these pilots are patriots. They're not going to be punished. So you see there, this is about politicization of the U.S. military. We have 2 helicopter pilots engaging in partisan politics while flying a very deadly helicopter.
There's so much here to unpack. And as you say, and I think it's important that people recognize that if you're not quite sure the difference between independent media and kind of corporate news, this is the difference. Piecing together the puzzle and exposing and explaining the trajectory of not just this authoritarian government, but the collapse of the system as it always was. And it's all intentional. Nothing is by accident. And all of these component parts are connected in some kind of hellscape of a matrix. Let's just go. I'm going to show that Kid Rock clip in just a moment after the break. But before we do that, I just want to go back to the ballroom for a second, because the one section we didn't talk about was the court and this taking Trump to court, because he actually posted, didn't he? Trump posted, the National Trust for Historic Preservation sues me for a ballroom that is under budget, ahead of schedule, being built at no cost to the taxpayer, and will be the finest building of its kind anywhere in the world. I then get sued by them over the renovation of the dilapidated and structurally unsound former Kennedy Center, now the Trump Kennedy Center, a show of bipartisan unity, a Republican and Democrat president, where all I'm doing is fixing, cleaning, running, and sprucing up a terribly maintained for many years building. But sorry, this text is very small, so I'm reading it like a child. The National Trust for Historic Preservation, a radical left group of lunatics whose funding was stopped by Congress in 2005, is not suing the Federal Reserve for a building which has been decimated and destroyed inside and out by an incompetent and possibly corrupt Fed chair. The once magnificent building is billions over budget, may never be completed, may never open. So
and by the way, you see, I cut it there. It was still going. We had to cut it at some point.
Right. So he's obviously pissed, and this is the point, isn't it? And so, but we hadn't mentioned the Kennedy Center, but that's another perfect example of leaking this dictatorship throughout everything. He looks at President Xi, he sees these kind of hanging banners of Xi and Xi's family, like the kind of whole heritage of a dictatorship, of a dynasty, and that's what he wants. And so even if Trump does expire, his brand, this is the point I'm trying to make, that it's Trump as an entity, as a trademark, as a business that he wants to continue for the rest of time in America.
Yeah, and you look, this decision was scathing. I mean, it was clear cut. He basically just said, you can't make these changes without going through Congress. You didn't follow any of the proper procedures or rules. You're just governing like a dictator. And you tied in the Kennedy Center. That's a perfect example there, which is, you have this thriving arts center where all these major performances, people from both political parties attend them. It's very diverse acts and different shows. All across the spectrum of different kinds of entertainment. And then he takes it over, wrecks it. Nobody will perform there. And then he closes it. Yeah. And then he says he's gonna, tear it all apart and reopen it again in his own image in a couple of years. And it's like, nobody wanted that. Nobody asked for that. He's doing this all on his own, unilaterally, one man. And so it will be interesting to see, because I say he's going to absolutely lose his mind if this decision stands, because the ballroom is his world. I mean, that is like more important to him than anything. If this decision stands and he is not allowed to continue with the ballroom, he's going to absolutely lose his mind. I mean, he's going to go crazy. And this could be literally a situation where he just tells the court, I'm going ahead with it, because he's already hinted at that, just like tariffs. You see, one of the things he argued was that the courts couldn't rule against him on tariffs because they've already collected all the money and it would be too hard or impossible to figure out how to give it all back. He's doing the same thing on the ballroom, because some of the comments that he's made was like, we've already torn it down. We already torn down the East Wing. It's a hole in the ground. You can't stop this project now. It's too late. I've already destroyed what was there, so it's too late. You can't stop me now. So this is what he does. He destroys, and then he says, you can't stop me from moving forward because I've already destroyed everything.
And he'll put really armed guards. He'll put armed guards that will work in for him on the perimeter of that environment so that he can continue construction. Because at the end of the day, he is a developer. That's all he is. He was a reality TV show host and a developer. And the reality show now is America. And he just loves to do these construction shows. I mean,
and on all of these things, where's Congress? Right. Where is Congress?
Yeah.
Where's anybody in Congress speaking up? Like take that military flop. I mean, that's the most blatant thing. The Secretary of Defense overruling the Army.
Yes.
And I looked at all the big Republican committee chairs, Armed Services Committee members. Not a peep. Not a word.
Well, it's abuse of power is the mantra of this unitary government. And the sooner that people wake up to what is happening, because you can look at it in two ways. You could be like, oh, it was just a flyby and, whatever. Or you can do what you just did and piece all of these elements together that show the destruction of the chain of command. We're going to show that clip in just a sec. We'll take a quick break and then come back with more Uncovered here on Uncovered. I got to be honest, around the age of 34, something just fell off. All my physical exercise and effort just seemed twice as hard. Now, nothing changed, same diet, same routine, but it felt like I was moving through mud. And nobody talks about this. One day you're crushing it, the next day you're dragging through everything, workouts, even just getting out of bed. So I started looking into it. And yeah, most guys start losing testosterone around the age of 30, slowly every year. And that's what led me to Mars Men. I'm actually kind of obsessed with this stuff. What I learned is that your body does make testosterone, but a lot of it gets locked up by this protein called SHBG. So even if you have it, you're not really using it. Mars Men is designed to help free that up so your body can actually access what it's already making. No synthetics, no needles, just real ingredients. For me, the biggest thing has been consistency. Energy that actually lasts, not like coffee spikes, just like a steady drive through the day. Workouts feel strong again, recovery's better, I just feel more like myself. And look, some men report higher energy, better focus, stamina, and honestly, I get why. They're made in the US, third-party tested, and there's a 90-day money-back guarantee, so there's really no risk in trying it. For a limited time, our listeners get 50% off for life, plus free shipping and 3 free gifts at mengotomars.com. That's mengotomars.com for 50% off and 3 free gifts at checkout. After you purchase, they'll ask you where you heard about them. Please support our show and tell them our show sent you. Ever have one of those mornings where you want coffee, but you don't want the anxiety, the jitters, or that midday crash? That was me. I love the ritual, I love the taste, but a full cup of coffee, it just started wrecking my focus. So I started trying mud water, and honestly, it's been a game changer. Their new low-caf coffee blend actually tastes like real coffee, because it is real coffee, made with organic Arabica beans, plus functional ingredients like lion's mane, cordyceps, and L-theanine. So you feel awake and focused, but without that wired, scattered feeling. It's like calm energy, which I didn't even know was possible, from coffee. And on days when I want something even smoother, I'll switch to their original blend. It's got cacao, chai, turmeric, super grounding, kind of like a cozy morning ritual in a cup. Everything they make is organic, non-GMO, no sugar, no weird additives. You just mix it with hot water. That's it. Super simple. So, if you're trying to upgrade your mornings without giving up coffee entirely, this is 100% worth trying. Ready to make the switch to cleaner energy? Head to mudwater.com and grab your starter kit today. Right now, our listeners get an exclusive deal up to 43% off your entire order, plus free shipping and a free rechargeable frother when you use code UNCOVERED. That's right, up to 43% off with code UNCOVERED at mudwtr.com. After you purchase, they'll ask how you found them. Please show your support and let them know we sent you. And links to our sponsors are in the description below. Okay, Ron, let's go back to the military, because we're going to talk about Iran in just a moment. And obviously there's been a huge shift there and the news about Trump and NATO. But let's just start with how you connected Kid Rock, Pete Hegseth, and this buzzing of this Apache helicopter. Let's take a quick look at the clip. So this is an example of an abuse of power, as we described earlier, which is where somebody breaks the chain of command and requests that a military helicopter wastes time and fuel to do a publicity stunt, effectively.
Yeah, at a time when jet fuel and other kinds of fuels are skyrocketing in cost because of the war. But, you notice something about this. This all started because Kid Rock posted that video on social media. And it went viral, and all the MAGA people were like, yeah. I mean, think about this. First of all, someone is filming that who is not named Kid Rock. Someone's moving, by the way. So there is actually another person there, I don't know who, filming this event. Someone who knew, it seems to me, ahead of time that it was going to happen. Because Kid Rock was standing out there as the helicopters fly up, and someone is filming as the helicopters fly up behind him. So was this a planned thing? I mean, or was this entirely spontaneous? I don't know. Seems very shady. So you have these guys on active duty being paid by the taxpayers, working for the U.S. military, who are, before they went to Kid Rock's house, again, they buzzed the No Kings protest in Nashville. They flew over their heads, and people were rattled by that. They were like, what the hell is going on? Why are there Apache attack helicopters flying over the No Kings protest? Then they go do this. Then it's filmed by Kid Rock and posted on social media, which goes out to all their right-wing followers. None of this is coincidental, and none of they act like, oh, what's the big deal? This is all part of a plan that they have implemented from day one that I have been railing against day after day after day. And there's very, very few, even Democrats, who see this as the problem that I see it as. Because I'm approaching it as someone who served in the Marines, who was a political junkie when I was in the Marine Corps, which is rare, but I was very into politics back then. And when I was 18, 19 years old. And every single time I even tried to talk about politics with a friend or whatever, I was told to stop. It was very, very strict. During my 4 years in the Marine Corps, honestly, I never heard or saw any partisan political conversations, activity, posters, hats, nothing, because it was strictly prohibited. And it's been that way since George Washington was the commander-in-chief. Eisenhower was strict about it. All the former military people who became presidents were very strictly enforced this thing. But since day one, Trump, Hegseth, and J.D. Vance have all given partisan political speeches to the military that I've been railing about. And I say there's only been a handful, like Mark Kelly, Jason Crow, some of the military veterans that are Democrats have spoken out about this, but I just think most Democrats don't really see the threat here. They don't see what a problem this is. Or they look at it like from an angle of like they're trying to get members of the military to vote Republican. To me, it's not really about that. It's about conditioning them to follow illegal, unlawful orders for partisan political reasons. And look, Mark Kelly and Jason and Crow tried to put out a video, right, with Alyssa Slotkin and a few others, warning about not following illegal orders. And what happened? They tried to prosecute him.
That's right. Yeah.
They tried to put him in jail. So this shows you the plan. It shows you how this is a serious plan that they are implementing to try and hyper-partisanize members of the military. And the first time any Democrat stood up to push back on this, they tried to put him in jail. They tried to prosecute him, and it only didn't happen because a grand jury refused to indict them. But they tried to do it.
Would you say that really, if the military were following the Constitution and not the executive, that they wouldn't have dropped missiles on a girls' school in Iran, that they wouldn't have gone even to war in Iran following Israel, knowing that Congress had not approved this action? Because I was kind of sitting waiting, thinking, well, at what point is the military going to stand up to Trump and be like, you're giving us unconstitutional orders? It hasn't happened so far, which may suggest that Trump has already succeeded in changing the military into some private army, like the Wagner Group.
What has to happen at some point for this to stop is you have to have a senior general, or admiral or somebody who's willing to take a stand and willing to put his career at risk, his retirement pension at risk, and stand up to these people and say, no, we're not doing this. That's literally what it's going to take. Or either Mike Rogers, the House Armed Services chair from Alabama, or Roger Wicker, also from Mississippi. Roger Wicker, the Senate Armed Services chair, one of those two who are basically control funding for the U.S. military and their budget, to stand up and take a stand and say enough is enough. And I continue to work these two guys. I'm working the refs here too. I don't leave Mike Rogers or Roger Wicker alone on social media. Now they get almost no social media engagement because they're not really on there very much. They post bland stuff, probably by staffers, but I just continue to hammer away at them, hoping to kind of get people to notice. In saying like when Hegseth overruled the discipline of the helicopter, I said to Roger Wicker, I'm like, I posted on his page. I said, what are you doing? Where are you? You know this is wrong. Why won't you say anything? So only thing we get here is right here. Greg Kelly. I mean, to his credit, Greg Kelly is a right-wing fanatical freak, major Trump supporter, a Newsmax host, but he's also a former Marine Corps pilot. So he knows the deal. And what Greg's doing here in this post is he's putting the fact that he was a Marine Corps lieutenant colonel and a fighter pilot in front of his partisanship, which is very, very rare in the Republican Party. But I'll give him credit for this. I can't stand Greg Kelly. I think he's an ass. But I'll give him credit for this post, because what he's saying right here is what Republicans in Congress should be saying, but they're too afraid to say it.
He posted, so what if those flyboys flew by Madonna's house and took a bow, or Robert De Niro? That would not be cool, right? But it's just fine for Kid Rockhead. What an amateur move, posting it on social media. Meanwhile, Hegseth runs the Pentagon like he ran his phony non-profits recklessly. He has no business micromanaging army units. He has no business micromanaging they must be disciplined. They must discipline hot dog pilots performing unauthorized stunts, because next time something could go very, very bad. It's like an eye test, this. I think that people need to join the dots, as you've been explaining, because the other sector to this that we haven't mentioned is the holy one, the biblical one, bringing Jesus into the military as well.
Absolutely.
And that is, again, coming from Hegseth, probably more so than Trump, but they're leveraging God, they're leveraging Jesus, and saying that this is God's will, certainly with regard to the war in Iran presently.
Yep.
And so this is a multi-pronged attack at changing the military from being a kind of non-partisan, kind of secular environment. Because they play Fox News on TV in all of the mess halls in these bases. So they are hearing a political state media brainwashing them over time. I would suggest that the majority of young military officers would be voting Republican by the time they come out of the army.
Again, we had a chaplain with every unit I served with. We had a church services on base, multi-denominational type things. But there was not ever a day, and I served under Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush. There was never a day when it was ever suggested to us that we should pray or go to church or attend church, or even by the chaplains. I mean, the chaplain's office was like right next to where I worked, like literally like 10 feet away. Never once did he come in and try and, proselytize to us. Never. I mean, it was like, if we went to him, we sought him out, as some did, then that's fine. But, that's not, and he did marriage counseling. They do all kinds of stuff, it's not just church stuff.
Right.
But, it was never pressured on us. It was never, you never did. So now what we have is we have Hegseth every single morning doing these group prayers that are broadcast. They're put on like TVs and military barracks all over the world and of course it's voluntary, but you know how this stuff goes. We've had multiple people file complaints at military bases all over the world saying that their commanding officers are pressuring them to attend these religious services. And you have to, it's difficult for anyone to understand who hasn't served in the military what it's like to try and say no when you're being pressured to do something. It's almost impossible. It takes a special, unusual kind of courage for someone serving on active duty to say no to a supervisor, because it's literally beaten in your head from the first day of boot camp that you are to never say no, that you are to do as you're told. And you've given up all your constitutional rights when you go in the military, which is largely true. So for someone to stand up for something like that is very difficult. And that's what they know. They know that they have a captive audience of a couple of million people who have signed away many of their constitutional rights, and they have to do it what they're told, and they're pushing this stuff on them.
The chances, therefore, of a general, as you alluded to earlier, stepping up and, leading some kind of military coup is highly unlikely, considering that in the US, there's never any pushback on anything. I mean, where are the Democrats? Where are the reporters and the journalists? Where is the media? There is no pushback. And so I just worry that Trump is getting on with a lot of stuff by stealth. And occasionally things slip out. Like, remember a few days ago, Caroline Leavitt stepped onto the podium to do a press briefing. And she said, "Oh, did you just catch us doing the end of prayers back there?" Because like the door was open or something, and they do a kind of group prayer before she goes on, steps up onto the podium again. And then you've got Mike Johnson doing prayers in Congress as well, when Congress is functioning, obviously, but bringing a pastor in, and everyone's laying hands, and it's a whole thing. So this is a move, and it's not Christianity. This is Christian nationalism. And it's really important that people understand the difference, because you and I are not here to criticize or question moderate Christianity. We're talking about an extreme form of far-right Christian nationalism, where the Christianity leaks into the nationalistic aspect, i.e. the executive running of the country, and using God as this kind of political leverage.
And, as we sit here and identify all these very serious problems and threats, looming threats,
yes,
I don't want people to give up, to be overwhelmingly discouraged, because as I try to include in my columns every day, there are a lot of people at the grassroots level standing up, fighting back, attending rallies, getting excited to vote. Trump's approval ratings are going into the mid-30s right now. Yes. And people say, I hear this all the time on social media and everything else, well, what does it matter, if Trump's approval ratings are so low, if he's gonna try and steal the election? Well, I understand that sentiment, but I don't really have time for it, to be honest with you. Like, you have to fight, and I'm still optimistic that in the end we're going to win this battle. And we are winning it. There's a lot of terrible stuff happening, but the point is, what we're trying to do is not demoralize people here into giving up by presenting a lot of doom and gloom. We're trying to make people hyper vigilant so they understand what's happening and understand how to inform others, so we can fight back and take our country back from this gangster government.
Because knowledge is power at the end of the day. And, you can put your head in the sand and be like, I don't want to have anything to do with this. Yeah. But, this is a tip-off. We are tipping people off as to what Trump is planning. It must not come as a surprise. We should also mention that he's losing in court an awful lot, and Democrats have been flipping seats like you wouldn't believe. So there is hope. And just look at 8 million people out on the No Kings rally. I mean, it would be remiss of us not to celebrate that and mention that on this program too. It was an incredible outpouring of peaceful protesting. And so I do think that all is not lost, but I think it's very important that we recognize quite how far Trump will go, and just keep watching that presidential library video to get a sense of how they see the world. They do honestly see America. There was another line, sorry to interrupt myself, but there was another line where when he was talking to the Japanese prime minister, and he said, he made that awfully embarrassing thing about the element of surprise, and the Japanese, oh, you like surprises and all this stuff. And he said, you didn't tip me off about that either. So he was referring to Pearl Harbor. And this is such a tiny thing, Ron. But it confirmed my feeling that Trump thinks he is America and America is him. And so when he's saying to the Japanese prime minister, you didn't tip me off about Pearl Harbor. I mean, never mind the fact that she wasn't even around in the 1940s. But more to the point, Trump thinks that he is America and America is him. And he's even taking this historical event and making it as if he was there at the time and that he should have been tipped off about the Japanese going into Pearl Harbor. It's remarkable.
He's gearing up to do this summer with the 250th celebration of the Declaration of Independence. He is making this a festival to honor Donald Trump.
Yes.
You're not going to hear much about Thomas Jefferson during these celebrations.
Right.
It's going to be all about Trump.
Okay, let's talk about NATO, because this is a massive, massive story. Again, something that you and I have been predicting for
a long
years
time.
now.
Since our first episode.
Since our first episode. We clearly keep saying that Trump wants out of NATO. And this, in my opinion, is connected to Vladimir Putin. Putin wanted to be in NATO. He was kicked out of NATO and has had a chip on his shoulder ever since and has been pressuring Trump to get out of NATO. I think every time they meet, he's probably like, oh, what is going on with that NATO situation? When they spend 3 minutes together in the beast where no one's listening. So I'm very much of the opinion that this has always been on the agenda, and the Trump regime has been looking for the right loophole to take advantage of. And in this case, it's that Trump attacks Iran closes the Strait of Hormuz. Trump never told NATO allies that he was going to attack Iran in advance. He then asks for their help. They say, this is not our war. He's like, well, I didn't need you anyway. Then 2 days later, he's like, well, where are they? Where's the Royal Navy? They should be doing something. And anyway, we don't even use the Strait of Hormuz, so it's not our fight. I mean, kill me now, Ron.
Yeah, I mean, I've got plenty of Twitter posts and plenty of clips on this show going all the way back to 2021, which I posted a couple of those old clips this morning, where I predicted that it was always Trump's plan to leave NATO in his second term. He knew that there was no way he could do that during his first term, not only because of what was happening in Congress, but also people inside his administration. So the plan was, and also, having to run for re-election. So the plan was always to do it in the second term, which is also why I believe that Putin's plan was to invade Ukraine during a second Trump term. That was the game plan. The game plan was for Trump to use the fact that countries weren't paying their fair share as the excuse to pull him out in the first year of his second term. And then shortly thereafter, Putin would invade Ukraine. The U.S. would play no role. And by the way, people say like Putin thought he was going to conquer Ukraine in a week. Well, despite the incredible heroism and bravery of the Ukrainian people and Zelensky, he would have been successful without U.S. help. It was U.S. intelligence and U.S. targeting help and U.S. weapons and assistance during that critical week that's helped save Ukraine. Ukraine deserves the lion's share of the credit, but it couldn't have happened without us. And if Trump was president during that critical week, Zelensky would be dead and there would be Russian soldiers in Kyiv right now. I mean, there would be no question in my mind. And that was Putin's plan all along. And so Trump losing the election sort of messed up that plan. He tried to do it anyway. It wasn't successful, but now Trump is back. And so them not paying their fair share is not really working anymore, because as a result of Putin's invasion of Ukraine, European NATO countries have ramped up defense spending. So that's not really an argument that Trump can use anymore to pull out of NATO. And then, by the way, in 2023, Congress overwhelmingly passed a law hedging against the fact that Trump could become president again. He was running at that time, passed a law with overwhelming bipartisan support that said that no president can pull the United States out of NATO without 2/3 vote of both houses of Congress. The person who wrote that bill and who sponsored it was Marco Rubio, Trump's Secretary of State. He wrote the bill to prevent Trump from pulling us out of NATO. And yet now, just 2 years later, 3 years later, Marco Rubio is out there advocating for the United States to pull out of NATO, as is Trump. And so the big question is, there is no doubt in my mind that they're going to try this. And they're using the fact that the NATO countries didn't back him in his war of aggression in Iran, which has nothing to do with NATO. They have every right to refuse to participate. NATO is a defensive alliance, not an alliance that requires member states to join the United States in wars of aggression. So the big question is going to be this. The people in the Trump administration believe that that law, which was written by Marco Rubio and passed overwhelmingly, is unconstitutional. This is what they're claiming. So what I think is going to happen is there's two ways that this is going to play out. They're either going to absolutely try and pull out of NATO and challenge this statute in the courts and say it's unconstitutional. And again, he's going to do it first and then make someone sue later. Or the other, I think, more plausible way that he's going to do this is we will formally remain part of NATO, but operationally, he will just yank everything away. He will stop sharing intel. He will pull troops out of NATO countries. He'll stop cooperating. We'll stop communicating with them. We'll stop joint training exercises while still technically remaining part of NATO. And that's his way around the law. And there's nothing Congress can do about that.
That's the Trump loophole that he's always looking for. Let's take a look at Marco Rubio making their point.
Let me ask you about NATO. You said that our NATO allies have been disappointing. Specifically, I know you're talking about Spain, Great Britain, France, even Italy now, and that after all of this is done, we will re-examine this relationship, and especially when it comes to, we pay 2/3 of the freight when it comes to NATO defense. And if it's just, quote, about us defending Europe, you said, at this point, how do we call that? And we can't have our landing rights in European nations, our allies, at a time when we need them. What good is that alliance? And is the NATO alliance at risk?
Sean, I've been one of the strongest defenders of NATO during my time as a United States Senator because I found great value in it. And it wasn't just about defending Europe. I said it also allowed us to have military bases in Europe that allowed us to project power into different parts of the world when our national security was threatened. If now we have reached a point where the NATO alliance means that we can't use those bases, that in fact, that we can no longer use those bases to defend America's interests, then NATO is a one-way street. Then NATO is simply about us having troops in Europe to defend Europe. But when we need their help, not their help, we're not asking them to conduct airstrikes. When we need them to allow us to use their military bases, their answer is no. Then why are we in NATO? You have to ask that question. Why do we have billions and billions of dollars, hundreds of billions of dollars, over the years, trillions of dollars, and all of these American forces stationed in the region? If we can only use, in our time of need, we're not going to be allowed to use those bases. So I think there's no doubt, unfortunately, after this conflict is concluded, we are going to have to re-examine that relationship. We're going to have to re-examine the value of NATO and that alliance for our country. Ultimately, that's a decision for the president to make, and he'll have to make it. We're going to finish the job here. As I said, we're very, very close to achieving our objectives on all of these things that I've outlined. But I do think, unfortunately, we are going to have to re-examine whether or not this alliance that has served this country well for a while is still serving that purpose, or is it now become a one-way street where America is simply in a position to defend Europe, but when we need the help of our allies, they're going to deny us basing rights and they're going to deny us overflight? I think these are very legitimate questions that we need to be asking, and this are going to have to be very carefully examined after this conflict is over.
So there's a huge gap missing in his argument there, and that is that they're currently in an illegal war that they started without getting the support of the international community, not least Congress. And so it simply doesn't apply, as we were saying earlier, that you should expect to be able to use other people's bases for an illegal war. And
the thing about Rubio is he knows what he's saying there is a lie. He knows what he's saying there is misleading. whereas like other people involved, they don't really care about NATO like Trump. And so it doesn't really matter. Like when they lie, they believe their own lies, but he knows he's lying. You know, as someone who was involved in Florida politics for many years, I watched Marco Rubio go through so many different transformations.
Yes.
And how it always blows my mind when you hear, you know, mainstream media people claim that Marco Rubio is like the normal, responsible adult in the room in the Trump administration. It's like, no. Are you familiar with Marco Rubio's history? I watched him go from the Speaker of the Florida House of Representatives many years ago, where he was known as someone who is a very pro-immigration Republican, and because he was an immigrant and his parents were immigrants. And then when he decided that he wanted to run for Senate in 2010, again, I was a president of a large Republican club. I hosted his very first speech when he kicked off his campaign. We had a luncheon with him, and he heard from many presidents of Republican clubs around Florida. And what he heard at that luncheon, which I sat next to Marco Rubio at his table, and what he heard was the biggest problem that you have in this election, this Republican primary, is your stance on immigration. You're too liberal on immigration. And I watched him before my very eyes later that day completely change his position on immigration that he had his entire life and give a very anti-immigration speech at my club, literally an hour after these people told him that this was a problem for him. And it has been this way. Then in 2016, he runs for president. He spends his entire campaign laying out some of the most vicious attacks against Donald Trump you have ever heard before. And I've posted all of them on social media. He said some of the meanest, nastiest things about Trump that he sounded like me, you know, back then. And then literally doing a complete 180 and being a Trump sycophant. And so when he says he was very pro-NATO in Congress, that is absolutely true. But when he's now claiming that he's changing this for principled reasons, that is a lie. He's changing it to conform to the new MAGA attitude towards NATO. So what he says there is, if they don't back us up and allow us to project power, why are we in NATO? NATO is not about member states backing up other member states when they're trying to project power in the Middle East and Asia. It is a defensive alliance. The NATO charter is very simple. It says when any NATO country is attacked, all other NATO countries, attack on one is an attack on all. That's what the NATO alliance is about. It is not about, hey, we want to invade some country in the Middle East, therefore you must help us. That is not what NATO is. Marco Rubio knows it, but he just lied about what NATO is in that clip.
Also, the only time Article 3 has been triggered was by the United States after 9/11. And that is another example of how NATO has been there.
Because the member states considered it an attack on the United States, on American soil.
Yes.
Not, hey, you know, some country somewhere might develop a nuclear weapon at some point, therefore we have to help that country invade them. That's not what NATO is all about. No. So, you know, it really is disgusting that Marco Rubio is doing this when he knows better. It's more disgusting that he does it than some of the other people who don't really understand what NATO is all about. And again, for anybody to say that like Marco Rubio is the responsible person in this administration is smoking dope, because he isn't.
Marco Rubio, as I see it, is extremely ambitious.
He's an opportunist.
He's an opportunist, but he thinks that he can become the president. He thinks that J.D. Vance is not popular enough. And so he sees these lies as a route to the presidency.
There's no question about it.
Right. And so, you know, you're not going to turn down, with all the effort that he's made over the years to get to various positions, you're not going to turn down that final stretch to the White House, are you?
Because you know why it's working. because there are a lot of polls right now among MAGA people who say, who a year ago were like all in on Vance, hey, Vance is our guy. That has shifted a lot inside the MAGA movement. And a lot of them are saying, hey, maybe we misjudged Rubio. Maybe we were wrong about Rubio. Seems like Rubio is might be the guy. He seems a lot more with it, a lot more competent. I have watched this over the last year. There has been a shift in a lot of Trump supporters off Vance onto Rubio.
Yeah.
And Rubio is more aware of that than I am.
That's right. And so he wants to take advantage of it. Listen, we only have 5 minutes left, so I'm really keen to pack in a couple of stories because, as we often say, all roads lead to Russia with Donald Trump. We just discussed how this, the Strait of Hormuz and NATO and everything, it all connects back to directives from Russia. And now we're hearing that Trump is allowing the US wants to allow a Russian oil tanker to go to Cuba. Let's take a look.
In the CNN poll, which just came out. Thank you very much, everybody.
One more thing on Cuba. There's a report that the U.S. is going to let a Russian oil tanker go to Cuba. Is that true?
Well, we have a tanker out there. We don't mind having somebody get a boatload because they have to survive. It wouldn't bother me.
That report is true as far as you know.
Well, I would say, I told them, if a country wants to send some oil into Cuba right now, I have no problem with it.
Do you worry that helps?
Whether it's Russia or not, what?
Do you worry that helps Vladimir Putin, though?
Doesn't help him. He loses one boatload of oil. That's all it is. It's fine. If he wants to do that, and if other countries want to do it, it doesn't bother me much. It's not going to have an impact. Cuba's finished. They have a bad regime. They have very bad and corrupt leadership. And whether or not they get a boat of oil, it's not going to matter. I'd prefer letting it in, whether it's Russia or anybody else, because the people need heat and cooling and all of the other things that you need. Go ahead.
Yeah. It's like, it couldn't be any more obvious, could it?
It's just the incredibly frustrating part about media too here, which is there's an obvious follow-up here, and it just never gets asked. It never, ever, ever gets asked about anything. There's never the follow-up that people like me sit here and scream out when these things are unfolding. Never happens. And it's just so incredibly, it's why I don't have hair. I pulled it all out. And so think about it. The Trump administration enacted, after they did the Venezuela thing, a blockade of Cuba. No oil is allowed, literally starved them of the ability to produce energy, electricity, just the U.S. Navy blockaded Cuba and would not allow oil in. Venezuela tried to send them oil. They were blocked. Mexico tried to send oil. They were told, no, you can't send your oil tankers through. Then Vladimir Putin sends an oil tanker. It gets there. And we were all like, it was being reported on. It's 4 days away. It's 3 days away. It's 2 days away. I was writing about it saying, what is Trump going to do? Is he going to have the U.S. Navy confront and turn away Vladimir Putin's oil tanker like he has with Mexico and Venezuela and others? No. The oil tanker gets there and Trump lets it in, lets it go. And it's like, wait a minute. And so then he's asked about it. Well, why are you blockading every other country from sending oil to Cuba, but you wouldn't block a Russian tanker? And he says, oh, anybody can send oil. This is what he just said. It's fine. Look, these people, they need oil. They're hurting. They need hope. He didn't care. He didn't care about any of that before. He caused the problem. The reason why they're hurting is because of his blockade. So it's like the obvious follow-up is, well, wait a minute. Why is it all of a sudden you're saying you don't have a problem? I mean, Scheinbaum, the Mexican president, after Trump gave that statement, gave a speech the next morning, is like, wait a minute. You blocked us from sending them oil. Now you're saying you're fine with it after the Russians send oil? What will be interesting now is to see what will happen if Mexico does try and send an oil tanker. Are they going to let that through now, or are they just going to?
When are people going to wake up to this, though? When are people going to wake up to the reality that Donald Trump has pivoted the U.S. to align with Russia and ignore the former transatlantic alliance nations and even the northern southern border nations too, in Canada and Mexico. Like, when are people going to finally wake up to the fact that this is going on? Because all the evidence suggests it, and even Trump's inability to kind of tell a quality lie. You know, you can see right through it, all of these statements. And it's just like, I mean, look, even the Europeans have taken way too long to wake up to the fact that Trump is on Russia's side. And I hear it in the commentary over Ukraine. They're like, well, maybe it's that Trump, like, is on Russia's side. And I'm like, oh, we've been saying this for 2 years.
They thought, like, he just doesn't understand our arguments. We just need to do a better job persuading him. Right. That was their attitude for the last year. Now you're right. Seems like their attitude is like, maybe he's on Putin's side.
Right. We've got 2 minutes left, so I'll give you a choice. You've got Lindsey Graham or Kristi Noem's boyfriend. Which would you prefer?
Okay, well, yeah, let's do Lindsey Graham. How about that?
Okay. So Lindsey Graham has posted a picture of him looking very butch in this photo. The reality is he was at Disneyland holding a pink bubble wand. Just tell us the story behind this very quickly.
Okay, well, TMZ has just opened a DC bureau where they have vowed to change the game in Washington, DC political reporting, because, and they make, I'll say on one hand, they make a good point, and on the other hand, I disagree with some of what they're doing. Yeah. So where is their good point is this: they're saying that among the DC media, there has basically been a conspiracy to not to report on the personal lives of politicians and their staff. You know, not to report on the affairs, the drug use, all the shady things that they do, you know, drinking and driving, doing drugs, all that kind of stuff.
Their sexuality, even
their sexuality, right? And and to cover that many of the DC reporters know all of this stuff and simply don't talk about it, don't report it, because that's kind of like the unwritten code. And TMZ has vowed to break that barrier. And they are going to start doing all of that kind of stuff. Daily Mail has also started doing that kind of stuff. But again, that's a Rupert Murdoch operation. So maybe they're only going to go so far. But those two organizations are claim that they're going to do it. So they're following all these politicians around in their personal lives and photographing them. And they followed Lindsey into Disney World. So he's walking around Disney World with a bubble wand. That's a Disney bubble wand, like for like bubbles for little kid. That's a little kid's toy. And he's walking around Disney all happy. And, you know, it's the worst kept secret that Lindsey is not a 70-year-old, never been married, single male because he hasn't found the right girl. You know, it's one of the worst kept secrets, but, you know, who cares, right? But it's just the fact that he can't be honest about it really is a testament to the fact that he's a Republican from South Carolina, and he figures those voters will just not cut me slack on who I am. And so that's the reality situation. So when TMZ posted that photo, it was massive ridicule and from both Republicans and Democrats came together. We rarely come together on anything, but we came together to make fun of Lindsey Graham walking around Disney with the bubble wand. So what he decides to do is post this photo of him a few hours later supposedly shooting clays, is what he said, with the boys. You know, he's out with the boys shooting to try and project this like alpha male image after he got caught with the bubble wand. Just kind of a fun
unbelievable
story.
Yeah. Okay, we have to run, but I'm so grateful to you as always. And, you know, join us next week. We'll piece the pieces together, because it's the puzzle that is the answer to a lot of these stories. So we'll continue to do that work. Check out Ron's work on Substack. Of course, I'm on Substack too at The Anthony Davis. So follow along, join, comment, share the show, catch the audio podcast that drops later tonight. And we'll come back next Wednesday with another Uncovered. Thanks, Ron.
All right. See you next week, everyone.